from a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA. This is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to maintain your cool at the deli counter when your tuna salad is filled with raisins. And now, the podcast host who has no worries for such things because he makes a big old beeline to the McChicken, Pete Dominic!
Oh, Pico, obsessed with my obsession with fast food chicken sandwiches. Thank you very much, my friend, for joining me and introducing me and always being there for me. We love Pico and everybody else listening to this show. Thank you as well. I've got two excellent guests joining me today. For the first time ever, I've got Kat Calvin, who is a voting rights activist, really interesting, thoughtful, brilliant, funny, cool person who I'm very excited to have on the show for the first time. If you want to skip ahead to that, you want to hear about voting rights, that begins at about 39 minutes. But before that, I've got the great Michael Cohen and his expert political analysis. Always tough to argue with, in my opinion, though many have tried and should try. If you disagree with Cohen, I'll bring you on and you can argue with him. How about that for a challenge? Kat Calvin, Michael Cohen, both joining me today on the program. Can't do it without you. Please sign up for a paid subscription right now. StandUpWithPete.com. And welcome to February, everybody. February. Don't forget that R. It's the hardest month to spell, they say. It's the month of Valentine's Day. It's the shortest month, right? It's 28 days this year. And, of course, it's Black History Month. I don't love, by the way, the themes and the days that we have. I always do appreciate bringing attention to different issues and causes, especially when they're important. But it seems a little token-y. That being said, so many different publicists and organizations do send me and pitch me guest ideas to have on during Black History Month, including Kat Calvin. That came through a suggestion from a publicist, and I'm really happy that it did, and I'm really happy to have her on because she's an awesome guest. So I'm not going to fight it, but I don't necessarily always play into these themes that they have, especially as every black comedian has always said, well, not every, but why is it always got to be the shortest month? That's Black History Month. The coldest month. That's also true. It's the third month, I guess, technically, of February, and time to get ready for spring, if you so desire. And if you're sowing seeds, if you're a gardener and you're thinking about doing that, usually people start to do that at the beginning of March, but you're getting ready to do that, then join the Stand Up Garden Facebook group. Stand Up listeners and others as well can join the Facebook group if you're on Facebook, the Stand Up Garden Club. Look for it on Facebook if you do that kind of thing. It's a really fun little community of people sharing ideas. If you can't find it, just email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And while I'm plugging things, the YouTube page, youtube.com/standupwithpete, and Instagram. Hey, we're activating the Instagram page to use it along with the show. My intern, Odessa, doing a great job with that. So like me or follow me on Instagram. I'm learning how to do stories and reels, and I'm only a decade late. All right, quickly, I wanted to mention a couple of news stories before we get into my interview with Michael Cohen, which is absolutely fantastic. And Michael talks about who is running for president in 2024. And I asked him, why are we doing this now? He said, because it's happening. And I wasn't skeptical. But then, of course, news breaks last night that Nikki Haley is going to announce a run. And then I see that Tim Scott, the black senator from South Carolina, he's headed to Iowa. So you're going to start seeing people step up and take on their former president, Donald Trump. It's going to get real interesting real quick, and I have an awesome conversation with Michael Cohen about it all. Also wanted to mention news on the great George Santos. You know what? Let me have Chris Hayes, who I really like watching on MSNBC, explain it in about 90 seconds about what happened yesterday. Hard to believe this pissant is still in Congress and hasn't resigned yet, but he is off his committees. Here's Chris Hayes.
Tonight, the House Rules Committee took up a resolution under emergency procedures to kick Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, off the Foreign Affairs Committee. The full House is expected to take up the measure as early as tomorrow, and it sounds like Speaker McCarthy might actually have the votes to pull it off, something that didn't seem quite ready until today when Republican Congressman and serial fabulist George Santos announced that he had voluntarily chosen to step down from his two House committees.
Yeah, I met with George Santos yesterday, and I think it was an appropriate decision that until he can clear everything up, he's off committees right now.
Was that something that you asked him in the meeting?
We had a discussion, and he asked me if he could do that, so I think it was the appropriate decision. Yes.
McCarthy tried to make it seem that stepping down was entirely Santos's idea and that it was just about the ongoing investigations into his campaign finances. But then Marjorie Taylor Greene let the truth slip about what really motivated Santos to step aside.
He just felt like that there was so much drama, really, over the situation, and especially what we're doing to work to remove Ilhan Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Ah, yes, of course. There you have it. Republicans wanted to kind of clear the decks, kind of get rid of this annoying argument, like you're going to let George Santos serve on committees. But so now they can move to kick Congresswoman Omar off foreign affairs for absolutely no valid reason, because George Santos, who should never have been put on any committees in the first place, really, when you think about it, has given up his assignments.
All right, well, enough about George Santos. We'll see how many days he has left in Congress. It can't be long, can it? Speaking of Kevin McCarthy and assholes in general, he is going to be meeting with Joe Biden, who said he would not be negotiating over the debt ceiling. Looks like they are. That was always going to be the case. It's inevitable, but the rhetoric is the rhetoric. The first time they'll be sitting down, apparently today, President Joe Biden discussing how to avoid a default on the U.S. debt with Kevin McCarthy. So look for news about that. Let's see. What else do I have for you? A small radioactive capsule was found on the side of the road in Australia. Okay, nothing to see here. Let's move on to news that Exxon reported record profits. How about that? The White House calling Exxon's record profits outrageous. They have a record $55.7 billion last year as oil prices surged following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and they gouged us at the pump. They made so much money off of the war. White House statement on Tuesday called it, quote, outrageous that Exxon has posted a new record for Western oil company profits after the American people were forced to pay such high prices at the pump amidst Russia's invasion. The latest earning reports make clear that oil companies have everything they need, including record profits and thousands of unused but approved permits to increase production. But they're instead choosing to plow those profits into padding the pockets of executives and shareholders. A statement from the White House yesterday, and no surprise on that news yesterday. Still extremely enraging and frustrating to hear. I subscribe to the great environmentalist Bill McKibben's Substack, and he writes about it in his latest meeting. Melting Alaska wants to drill more oil. The Biden administration has a big call to make on the ludicrous Willow Project. So look up the ConocoPhillips Willow Project and learn more about that. But ConocoPhillips has said it may need to freeze the rapidly thawing ground with massive chillers in order to drill for the oil that will drive that melt even higher. It's a crazy story. And as Bill McKibben writes, physics doesn't grade on a curve. While President Biden has done good for the climate, the Inflation Reduction Act, the recent decision to protect Alaska's Tongass National Forest, when Interior Secretary makes the call on this project, that's Deb Haaland, she'll be deciding whether to put a truly massive slug of carbon dioxide into the air, CO2, that will long outlive her and the rest of us. So important news on that. And well, that's all the news I'm going to give you this morning, because I want to get to my guests. I certainly don't want to depress you. So how about this? Damar Hamlin is working with the Heart Association to bring awareness to all kinds of different issues. I like to hear that. I thought that was fun. And don't miss the best chance to see that green comet streaking across the sky. That's tonight and tomorrow night, apparently. The comet's been moving closer to Earth, and as a result, it's becoming more visible in the Earth's sky. Oh, my God, it's coming right at me. Okay, sorry about that. Let me get to my guests. Kat Colvin coming up after I talk with Michael Cohen, who, of course, is a former Boston Globe columnist. He's the author of a couple of really good books Unfortunately, he shares the name with an even more famous Michael Cohen, or infamous Michael Cohen, you could argue. Hey, but hell, that makes people make mistakes and it gives him attention, and then they become fans of his work. You could subscribe to that at truthandcons.substack.com. He's awesome on Twitter if you still do that, at SpeechBoy71. And today I talked to him about his most recent piece titled, "He's Not Going the Way." And I'm doing a little Schwarzenegger because he used Schwarzenegger with an "I'll be back" kind of image. He says, "I'm done with Donald Trump, but sadly it seems Republican voters don't feel the same." All right, let's get this baby underway right now with Michael Cohen. You don't want to miss Cat Colvin after that, so let's do it right now. You want to just jump right in and just dig right in and like it's a cable news hit?
Sure.
Join us now from truthandcons.substack.com, Michael Cohen. Michael, you have a really important piece that I think we have to talk about, as I want to talk about all your stuff. He's not going away. And you're using an image of the Terminator with the famous phrase, "I'll be back," to promote this piece, which I thought was funny. Always humor infused in your work. Go ahead and make the general case, and I'll come up with arguments as to why you're wrong, and then in the end, probably agree with you.
Well, to be clear, we're talking about Donald Trump. And my argument, and I don't make this argument with much pleasure, is that he is most likely to be the 2024 Republican presidential nominee. And I think a lot of people have gotten on this idea that he's been weakened, that Ron DeSantis from Florida is the new flavor of the month and the new sort of preferred Republican nominee. And my case is that if you look at sort of the specifics of the Republican race, that they really do favor Trump. And there's three reasons for this. One is that he still has support of like 40%, give or take 5-10% of Republicans, which is kind of remarkable considering, what an incredibly bad president he was and, how bad he's been in the 2 years since he left office. And yet that has not dented his support among this sort of 40% of the party. And as long as he has that support, he's going to be a tough candidate to beat because he's not facing a head-to-head contest with DeSantis. He's facing a multi-candidate contest. And this is the big thing about, I think, what really helps Trump. A lot of people are going to run in 2024, not just DeSantis. You're going to have Nikki Haley. You might have Tim Scott. You might have Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. You've got Mike Pence, just laughable, but he's running. Mike Pompeo, maybe Liz Cheney. All these folks are going to run. And the more candidates you have, it means that a candidate who has a solid 40% of the party has a huge advantage, right? Because then not the person to beat him has to get more than 40%, which means basically that everyone else has to drop out of the race or just, can't do well enough that they get some of that support. And if it was just like Trump versus DeSantis, I would actually say that Trump would be in some trouble, but it's not. It's Trump versus this whole field. And the thing that also helps him is that what traditionally happens in these primary races is that there is a front runner who is Trump in this case, and there's like a number two person, in this case, DeSantis. And usually there's a bunch of also-rans who are polling worse. They tend to not attack the front runner, in this case, Trump. They attack the number two guy in DeSantis. And I think that's what's going to end, because they want to be the alternative to Trump. And it makes a lot of sense in the Republican Party because, we've learned this lesson over 7 years that if Republicans who attack Trump then get attacked by Trump, and it weakens their support in the party. So none of them really want to go after Trump. They don't want to make a full assault against Trump. They want to go after DeSantis so they become the alternative to Trump. Also, by going after DeSantis, they curry favor with Trump. So if some of them are, say, running for vice president, then that helps them. And you saw this a few weeks ago with Kristi Noem, who's the governor of South Dakota. Yeah. Yes. And was it North Dakota?
I think
she's one of the Dakotas. I can't remember.
Yeah.
She basically, her press spokesperson attacked DeSantis. And there was an interesting Daily Beast article about this that made
South
clear. South Dakota, thank you. That made clear she did this in part because she wants to be VP running mate for Trump in 2024. And she's trying to get on Trump's good side. And no way to do that than to attack DeSantis. So what I think two dynamics you have here. One is Trump has this not huge, but solid amount of support. The other candidates in the field who are not DeSantis are going to be incentivized to attack DeSantis, not attack Trump, which is going to weaken DeSantis. And of course, the better those other candidates do, the more they stay in the race, and the more they stay in the race, the more that helps Trump. This, by the way, is exactly how Trump won in 2016. He won because it was a crowded field. And if you may remember, one of my favorite moments of 2016 campaign was the New Hampshire debate before the New Hampshire primary. all of these candidates were on stage and they all attacked each other. Chris Christie famously went after Marco Rubio. They didn't attack Trump because they all wanted to be the alternative Trump. But the result of it was that Trump didn't get hit. He maintained his support. He won New Hampshire primary and went on to win the nomination. So I think all those factors are playing in Trump's favor. The final thing is, I think that DeSantis is an overrated candidate. That's a whole other conversation. I just think the dynamics of the race favor Trump. And I'll say one last thing about this before I let you interrupt me. But, he went to South Carolina this weekend. He attacked DeSantis, was, I thought ironically enough, attacked DeSantis for opening up Florida too soon to COVID, that he kept it closed for too long. For too long. Yeah. Which is weird and unfair because DeSantis, like, to his credit, like, he really has gone to great lengths to kill his fellow Floridians with COVID. And, to not get credit for that from Trump seems unfair. Give the guy his due. He's really, like, killed a lot of people. So I felt that was really like an unfair attack. But
you wrote that. Okay. I laughed very hard at that in your article. For fuck's sake, what does a Republican have to do to imperil the lives of their constituents and get rewarded for it? You wrote.
That's what I'm saying. Literally, a lot of Floridians died because Ron DeSantis could run for president, and now he's getting attacked for not, killing more of them. It just seems like kind of crazy to me. Like, I don't know. It's just weird. But then the point is that, so he went after him, but then on Nikki Haley, somebody asked him about Nikki Haley, and he said, I think she should run.
Right.
Which suggests a level of savvy you don't expect from Trump. But I think he realizes that if Haley runs, it's probably better for him because the more crowded the field is, the better it is for him.
I don't know about that.
I'd say it's also because the winner take all primaries. You can win 40% of the vote and win all the delegates. It doesn't work that way among Democrats. You win proportionally among Democrats, but Republicans, it's all winner take all.
I think that's a really important point just about the nominating process, because it's so easy to get bogged down if you're not paying attention to state by state polling, and you shouldn't be. I think it's easy to get bogged down and, how much support is there for Donald Trump. But the truth is, in a crowded field, he only needs like 20% or so if there's 4 or 5 candidates, and he wins. So it doesn't matter if the vast majority of even Republicans don't like him. He only has to do better than the other 4 who are eating each other alive.
That's exactly right. And again, that's how he won in 2016. I just looked it up right now. He won the New Hampshire primary with 35% of the vote in 2016. And second was John Kasich, just 15%. So that's a lot of, that is how he did it in 2016. And I think it's how he can do it again in 2024.
So what do you make of the scenario that many are saying that he will run as an independent and let Republicans fight it out, and that helps him get around all of that?
Well, why bother? He can, because I think he'll run as a Republican. I think he'll win. I'm not making a prediction here. And I'm not saying that I think he definitely will be the nominee in 2024.
Well, you're not making a prediction because you don't know who's going to step into the ring, knowing what you know, and the fact that we already did this once. You can make a pretty accurate prediction on this is how it'll be if you knew how many people and who was running, I suppose.
Yeah, if it was just DeSantis and Trump, I would actually think that Trump might not win. Because if you look at, it's interesting. One of the weird dynamics of the polling that we've seen so far is that when Trump is positioned against in a multi-candidate field, he's winning by double-digit points. But when you ask people head-to-head, DeSantis versus Trump, DeSantis is winning, which suggests all people who are voting candidates other than DeSantis don't really like Trump. But that's not what's going to happen. It could, but I don't think so. I think you're going to have a lot of candidates who are going to run, a lot of candidates who I think probably can't win, who have ceilings. Liz Cheney, Mike Pence, and the best bet probably is DeSantis, but he's going to get attacked by everybody.
Yeah. Why does a candidate like that does not have a chance run? Do they really think they have a chance, or are they just getting out there, making money, getting name recognition, and being part of the game?
They think they're going to win. They have convinced themselves of a strategy by which they could win. I think that's the main reason.
How come no one talks about Ted Cruz running?
I think people talk. I think he is going to run. He's not going to win. He's unlikable. But I think that Cruz, maybe he won't. I think he's going to run. I expect he's. The thing is that all these guys want to be president, and if you look at this situation, it's kind of hard to sit a race out, right?
Yeah, right.
You want to run, and you never know what could happen in these nominating contests. Look, my honest view of this would be these guys should all wait to 2028. They should let Trump run in 2024. And lose to Biden, because I think first of all, Biden is in a very tight, very strong position that it's going to be hard to beat him, and that anybody who is not Trump who gets the nomination is going to get attacked by Trump. So if DeSantis beats Trump in this nominating contest, Trump, I think, would rather Biden win than DeSantis do what he couldn't do, which is beat Biden.
That is a really, for sure, that's right. For sure, that's right. He could care less about the Republican Party or the country. He only cares about winning, and he cares about the people that are perceived to have beaten him being destroyed.
Yeah, I think if DeSantis is the nominee, I think Trump will go out of his way. You're not going to see the two of them like raising their arms together in unity at the convention in 2024. You're going to see Trump attack DeSantis or try to weaken him
after he's done saying that he didn't really win. So
unless Trump drops dead, and we should talk about that in a second. Unless that happens, which is certainly a possibility, I suppose. I think any nominee of the party who's not Trump is going to get attacked by Trump, and so I don't think I think it's like a poison chalice if you end up getting the nomination. I don't think you can actually beat. You can win. Obviously, anything can happen, but it seems unlikely. 2028 is a much better terrain for Republicans because, first of all, Biden can't run again. You're going to have a fractured Democratic field, and it's hard to win 3 elections. Any party win 3 elections in a row.
Odds that we're still around in 2028, the planet. So how about, though, why you're writing this and why we're talking about this here at the beginning of 23?
Well, first of all, we're a year away from the primaries. I mean, this thing is starting up now. Trump's doing campaign events now, and you're going to see people announcing between now and the summer. I mean, I think it'll happen in the next couple of months. You'll have more people announcing.
What responsibility is it of the media to cover or not cover Trump's every rally, every comment, every speech? Soon he'll, I guess, probably be back on Facebook, and then eventually he'll throw his own company and Devin Nunes under the bus and be back on Twitter. What is the responsibility of whether it be cable news or social media in platforming him, knowing that he is a traitor to the country who led a violent insurrection on the nation's capital while he was president, or even if you didn't agree with that interpretation, certainly didn't do anything to stop it while he was president?
But I don't know what choice you have. I mean, I remember back in 2016, the Huffington Post said they weren't going to cover Trump's presidential campaign because he was an entertainer and it wasn't a real, campaign that he was running. Well, that didn't work out so well. And I just feel like, I get all the points you're making, but he's running for president. He has the support of the Republican Party. You can't ignore him.
Well, there's a difference between ignoring him. I mean, what do you say to those who would argue that, CNN and MSNBC helped elect, and New York Times helped elect Donald Trump by covering him so much versus covering him at least less or in a different way or not carrying his every speech or something like that? Is there a middle ground?
There's a middle ground. But,
editorially?
It's first of all, these companies are especially the cable news, are in the entertainment business as much as they are in the news business. But you just kind of can't not cover a guy running for president when he's, like the likely nominee. And I don't know that. Look, I was always of the view that that sunshine was the best disinfectant. The more people saw Trump, the worse he would do, which turned out to be wrong. I don't think it's as true now as it was 8 years or 7 years ago. But I just think there's not a lot of ways to handle this differently. You're going to have to kind of, you can remind voters that he, basically incited insurrection and that, all the terrible things he's done and said, and reporters do that all the time, but you can't not cover the guy. I mean, he's running for president. I mean, it's a news story. It's not something you can just ignore.
What about the Democratic nominee? Are we just resigned to the fact that it's going to be Joe Biden? When would be the last kind of moment for him to announce that he's not running?
He's running. He's definitely running. I mean, look at all the events he's doing right now. He's trying to have the country touting his infrastructure bill and all the investments that are being made. Could be
because he wants to get credit for his, what he did the first 2 years. He's certainly not going to get a lot done accomplished the next 2 years.
I mean, not in Congress, no. But he certainly, which is fine. Which is, look, a lot of presidents have profited from that kind of a situation. I mean, you always think about Truman in 48, the do nothing Congress he ran against. That, Republicans won the House in 46 and then they did nothing for 2 years. And he basically ran against that. I mean, I think, for Biden, I wrote this piece a few months ago that, politically, he's in as good a position as a Democratic incumbent has been in a very long time. Right. He's popular within the party. Progressives, usually if you get a primary challenge comes from the left, the left seems to like Biden. He had a pretty good midterm cycle. He's pretty popular, and he's not going to get a primary challenge. So
he's not going to get you're convinced he's not going to get a primary challenge?
Not going to get a serious one, no. Who's going to run against him? What's the argument for running against him? I don't even know what it would be. I mean, the biggest thing that hurts an incumbent president, not the biggest thing, but one thing that really hurts them often is a primary challenge. I mean, it hurt Bush in 92. It hurt the Democrats in 68. It hurt Carter in 80. Yeah. It causes a lot of political pain.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
And there's no indication that's going to happen this time for Biden.
He runs with Kamala Harris on the ticket?
I mean, I don't think you can drop her, even though, you could argue that she's not the best politician in the world. And there's a big piece in the Washington Post yesterday that basically is saying Democrats are very concerned about Harris. And I think I get that. And having covered her in 2020, they should be concerned about her. She's not a great politician. She's good on the stump. She can be charismatic. She's not a great politician.
Very smart woman, very passionate.
Very smart, but you can be very smart and be a bad politician. I think she's a bad politician. I don't think she's... Look, I always say this point that, like, to win the NBA MVP, you need to be the best player. To win the presidency, you need to be the best politician. And you need to be good at politics to get elected president.
Do you think it's harder? Do you think that there's sexist undertones of talking about women not being good politicians? I feel like there's a different standard for men versus women in terms of how we see them as good politicians. I feel like there's so many folks who are otherwise progressive and well-intentioned that just like, there's something about me, something about Elizabeth Warren I just don't like. Well, what could it possibly be? I mean, like, what does it mean?
So I think the thing with Harris, and my thing on Harris, was that she was too cautious as a politician, way too cautious and way too inclined to change her positions based on what was politically best for her. I think she comes across as very ambitious. And I don't say that about Elizabeth Warren. I don't think that that's Elizabeth Warren's issue. I think with Harris, when you don't stick to one position or you kind of jump around based on whatever political winds are blowing, then you come across as somebody who's maybe too ambitious and doesn't have real core beliefs. And I don't know if that's fair about Harris, but I had that sense from watching her in 2020. Even though I was very impressed with her on the stump, I thought she was very good on the stump.
So, all right. Well, what else do we have to talk about, Michael? This is a really...
Well, I think the thing I mentioned this earlier about Trump dying, there was a really
why do you want to talk about that hypothetical?
McKay Coppins had a really interesting piece about this.
You got a new piece in The Atlantic about... Go ahead.
Yeah, so he interviews a bunch of Republicans who have no strategy for stopping Trump from the nomination. And what was sort of hilarious is how many of them kind of said, our best hope is, if he dies. And it reminds me of the Seinfeld thing where, like, George is dating, what was the woman who died? his fiancée who died, Susan. And he doesn't want to get married. And he's kind of rooting for a plane crash. And Jerry's like, a plane crash? And George's like, they happen. It could happen. You're so negative. You never know. It could happen. And so I think they're like, we don't want to go after him. We can't beat him. We don't want to attack him because then he'll attack us. So let's hope that he drops dead. And then,
people said that to McKay Coppins off the record.
Off the record. They said the best hope was that he drops dead. And look, he's, doesn't exercise, eats like a 12-year-old. He's a bit stressed. I mean, but, his parents lived a long time and I fear he will be with us forever. He's never going to die.
That's why I think you have to outlive him, or else technically he was with you forever.
Look,
like my dad is doing great, but he's almost 80. And one of the things that keeps him alive is that Dick Cheney's still alive. He wakes up every morning and he calls me. He's like, any news from Wyoming?
So once Cheney goes, then, you have to.
No, that's why we got to keep Cheney, keep giving him hearts.
He's alive. It is actually kind of crazy that Dick Cheney is still alive. It's kind of a remarkable feat.
Yeah.
The thing is that, and I think the reason they're concerned is that if Trump's I don't like making predictions. I don't do it in general, but I think if Trump is a nominee, I'm not going to predict that he's going to lose, but I would say it is highly likely that he does not win the presidency.
Yeah. No, I mean, I know it just sounds so crazy to say that because we said it the first time I did. But I think that, as I've always talked about this with Barry Ritholtz in a statistics class, if you ran that election 10 more times, he loses all 9 times. Like,
of course. I mean, him winning was a fluke. And, if Comey doesn't come out with the statement about Hillary Clinton and the email thing right before the election, I think she probably wins. So, we were wrong in 2016. I don't think we're going to be wrong in 2024. He's not I think it's very unlikely that he would be able to get elected. And I think Republicans know that. And I think he'd be a disaster for the party if he's the nominee. He'd be an absolute disaster for the party if he gets nominated.
One could argue that he has in many ways been a disaster for the party. He's why they lost the Senate. That's why Mitch McConnell hates him, which is hilarious, of course, that those two men despise each other. That brings me.
It's the Iran-Iraq war of political conflict. It really is.
But the point is that he has done tremendous damage to the Republican brand.
He has. I mean, but the flip side of it is he's also helped Republicans as well. I mean, like 2018 is a good example of this. 2018, Democrats won 40 seats in the House, but a lot of Republican senators got reelected that year or won elections that year in red states, in part because of Trump. In 2020.
But some lost in part because of Trump, too, in Georgia, one might argue.
No, but 2020, like Iowa was a close race. North Carolina was a close race.
Right.
And, ultimately, the Republican candidates ran basically pretty closely with Trump's numbers. And I think he helped them in a lot of those red states. And that's also, by the way, a lot of the problem Republicans have is that they want to separate themselves from Trump, but they actually do sort of benefit from Trump. It's why you saw McCarthy, basically reaching out to him after January 6th, because he realized that Trump probably in certain places helped Republicans. Of course, we saw in the election results, he hurt more than he helped. But for a lot of Republicans who are in safe seats, being tight with Trump is good for them. That's the other problem that the Republicans have, is that he hurts them way less than he helps Republicans. There was in certain districts.
There was some really interesting analysis. I wonder if you saw this or if you've noticed this. I read it from Adam Parkamenko and Sam Youngman, who write that daily newsletter, Today's Big Stuff, which I love. And then their analysis was of this guy, Congressman Joe Comer. Is he from Kansas? Wherever he's from, he's a chairman of, I think, Oversight Committee now, Republican. And the analysis, the analysis was he goes on the mainstream networks or a CNN or an MSNBC, and is a toned down, kind of more serious approach to things, and is a little bit critical of Trump. But then he plays a completely different character on the right, on Fox or on NewsNation, on these right wing, not NewsNation, Newsmax. And when he goes on there, he's red meat. He talks about the conspiracies that he supports. And one, he says, I voted to confirm the election. On the other, he brings up questions. And it's an interesting way to straddle a message. But we're so partitioned in terms of our political ideologies along media lines, he can get away with it. But
this is why, for example, I'm not sold on DeSantis, because DeSantis is total right-wing culture warrior, always attacking woke liberals, now endorsing anti-vax stuff. I mean, he is like the ultimate right-wing culture warrior. The idea that he can then pivot to being a more centrist, moderate, acceptable candidate for Democrats just seems like it's not going to happen, right? And so I just think that this is the problem Republicans have. Their base is so fucking insane. They have to play to this base. I mean, DeSantis is now an anti-vaxxer. That's how crazy the base of the party is.
Yeah,
like that's not going to play, with suburban voters in Michigan or Pennsylvania or Georgia. Like, it's just not. And I think that this is the problem that they have. It's a bigger problem than just Trump. Like, they're a party that is a fringe conspiracy theory,
Christian nationalist.
Yeah. So it's a real problem. I mean, you look what happened in 2022. I mean, a lot of Republicans voted for Democrats. That's one reason why they lost. And they also they're getting destroyed in suburbs. They're getting absolutely destroyed in suburbs because these voters are just not interested in what Republicans are selling. They're just not.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty sound analysis as usual from you on all of it. I mean, it really is the case that we still have time to figure out who's gonna run and who's not going to run. I mean, I still predict that the nominee will be Mike Pompeo. I still say it. Yeah, that's right. Put all my chips.
What is his book called? Never Give an Inch?
I put all my chips. His new book is Never Give an Inch, I think.
There's also, by the way, I believe his wife's biography.
That's accurate. That's unfair, but true. And always give a centimeter.
Too easy. I had to do it. Sorry.
But no, he is going to, I can't tell you why, because I can't predict the exact future of the circumstances that are as yet unforeseen. but he will be the nominee, and you will be shocked, and all of the credibility that I have desired and sought after my entire career will finally come to me.
As I tweeted out last week, he attacked Adam Schiff. I think it was Adam Schiff, and I said, the future sixth place finisher in the Iowa caucus has some thoughts.
Oh, is that right? You think Pompeo will
maybe? And someone pointed out he could be too generous to say he finished sixth in the Iowa caucus.
Listen,
but he's not going to win the Iowa caucus.
All Mike Pompeo needs is a little bit more light. He has exactly what it takes to be the Republican nominee, because the main quality, and now I'm kind of moving away from humor or even kind of cynicism, is he is such a dick.
Have you met Ron DeSantis? Have you met Ted Cruz?
Pompeo is, I think, probably in some ways a bigger dick. And I think to some extent it's because he's really is very religious, or certainly plays the role better than even a DeSantis. He's a true Christian warrior, it would seem. And I think he's got that kind of Christian masculinity that America wants and needs so badly, that you should look into. As a matter of fact,
I should look into Christian masculinity. I think Mike Pompeo is he will get, if he gets 2% of the vote in Iowa, I will be surprised. I think Mike Pence will do better than him. He'll get 4%, but I think Pence will do better.
Friendly wager on the Pence Pompeo.
I think Pence gets like slightly more votes than Pompeo, but not by a lot.
But the wager is I have to come into your space, your Substack, your Zoom or whatever, and humiliate myself, and you have to do the same for me. It's some kind of
I do that every time I come on your show, don't I?
That's true. That's not untrue. Michael Cohen, always great to talk to you. I love talking to you, and everybody should read this latest analysis, which goes more in depth, and subscribe, as J.L. Cohen said yesterday, as he does, to truthandcons.substack.com. Thank you, sir.
Or just truthandcons.com. You can check it out there.
In case I don't talk to you before the Super Bowl, do you have a prediction there?
I grew up in Philly. I'm not a huge Eagles fan. I'm a Lions fan. God help me. And so I want the Eagles to win, but I think the Chiefs are going to win.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
I hate to say it, but the Eagles didn't play anybody, and they didn't look that great actually on Sunday, I thought. Were you upset that the New York, that the Empire State Building lit up with Eagles colors? Is it possible that they were? I was upset both as someone who grew up in Pennsylvania and as a New Yorker. What the fuck? Yeah. What is that? Do you think that will you leave open a possibility that it was a tribute to the Jets season? Did you watch the Jets season? Yes, but maybe that's why the Empire State Building. What's the tribute? That they finished like 7-9 in this, or 7-10 was the playoffs, or 8-9? Possibly be honoring the football team from Philly. Are you a Jets fan? I was, but I've decided to quit them, and I quit being a mostly a sports fan, but then an NFL fan. But now I think I'm back, and I'm back for the Buffalo Bills, which is where I've always should have been growing up in Syracuse. Yeah, you should have. Yeah. But I'm a Lions fan, so I've been my entire life. Why are you a Lions fan? I was born in Detroit, and so I just always a fan. It's a stupid thing. I mean, other Detroit sports teams have done well, but the Lions they're not good. But they were very good at the end of last season, and they're going to be good next year, I think. So
that's
watch
what
out.
People in Michigan have been saying for a long, long time. Thank you. No. This year, I actually do think this year, next year is different. I think this team is actually seriously good. I'll put it in my calendar for next year, this time, to talk about the Lions season. Please. Looking forward to doing that. Michael, thank you. Always a pleasure, Pete. Thanks for having me. All right, there he goes. Michael Cohen. Go follow him on Twitter. Go subscribe to his Substack. It's so good reading him. I always read Michael Cohen. Truth and Consequences. Truthandcons.substack.com. Okay, now time for guest number 2 on today's show. And I'm very happy to have her for the first time on the show. She's making her debut here on Stand Up, which has to be very, very big for anybody, really, much less a young activist like Kat Calvin. He's doing such important work out mainly in California. Well, I should say all over the country, working on voter registration, voter ID, fighting back against voter suppression in so many ways. She's a social entrepreneur, a writer, got a new book coming out in next year. Also, the organization founder and executive director of Spread the Vote and Project ID. She's the co-founder and CEO of Project ID Action Fund. And really, she's built a national organization that helps Americans obtain the IDs that they need for jobs, housing, and life.
And that also allows them to go to the polls, and she's working towards the passage of the Ideas for Inclusive Democracy Act. I can't talk, but I do pretty decently during this interview. Her new book, American Identity Crisis, comes out in September of this year. And very excited to have her joining me for the first time. CatCalvin.com. Follow her on Twitter and Instagram. You can find her at CatCalvinLA. And ladies and gentlemen, let's do it right now with Cat Calvin.
Boom. Got her. Very excited to have you joining me, Cat. Your work is so important, and I want to talk all about it. Thank you for saying yes.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited about it. I love your background and the rally to restore sanity. I was there. I remember that. It was good times. That was fun.
Yeah, thank you. Finally, someone comments, I've worked very hard on creating like this kind of personality story about me, and no one ever cares. But you did.
No, you even have like the door is framing you perfectly.
Thank you.
Like my bookshelf is a disaster. Your books are neat and orderly. You're rating very high on the Rate My Background site.
Thank you so much, Kate. Let's talk for a while longer about me. That rally that restores, you commented, if people don't know, that was the Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert thing. I think it was 2010. I have no idea how old you are, but I saw you as like at least 10 years younger. I mean, were you there as a child?
No, I was. I had actually just moved to DC that summer, so I must have been 10-30. Oh, I had just turned 28.
Oh, okay.
And I remember that felt like the worst that things were going to get, and now it's kind of hilarious how light and fluffy politics were compared to what they are now.
I mean, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but can you go back to that time when it was Obama's presidency? It was the after the midterms, I think, or just before. It was the ascendancy of what they called the Tea Party. Can you look at, from your point of view, how you were seeing things then, or is that like too long ago to kind of put it?
Oh no, I remember very well because I just graduated from law school and moved to DC. October 30th, so it was the week before midterms, and I remember very clearly when the Tea Party started as tea baggers, and we all thought that was fantastic. And then they realized their mistake, as they always do, a little too late. But, we had the Tea Party, and there was so much anger and racism because we had the first Black president, and, they were trying to do the ACA, and there, and we were going into a midterms where, that the party in power always loses anyways, but there was so much anger and hatred and vitriol. And I remember, obviously Jon Stewart, who had been the voice of reason for so long, and I'm so glad he's back, but he and Colbert coming to DC and doing this rally because there had been so many like angry rallies in DC, and I lived right by the mall. Like I ran on the mall every day. And so I was always seeing this. And I remember just thinking, this is as bad as America has ever been. I'm so stupid. We were so naive, and like being so happy that John and Stephen had come and like done this rally that was really fun, but at the same time was like, hey, what are we doing? Like, what the F, right? And right before midterms. And then I was doing voter protection at the DNC during the elections. And for me, it was because it was my first time in DC, like it was very interesting because, we were getting all these phone calls from all over the country about just how confused people were. And I think it was when I was like first realizing like, oh, people have a really hard time voting. But then when we just, when Dems were completely crushed, I was in a room with a bunch of people who were losing their jobs. And so there was this very heavy feeling of like, okay, all of this like racist vitriol worked. But also, all of these people who I know and have liked and have been in this room with for several days also just lost their jobs. And it was more real, I think, than any election had been, sort of ever for me.
Oh, wow. You definitely did it. That was really interesting to hear your perspective at that time, and also just kind of know where you were and what you were doing. Clearly upholding a mean running regime. I've run in the mall. Like, that's one of the greatest places to run in D.C. I ran the night before Trump's inauguration. I was still working at SiriusXM. I was covering the inauguration for SiriusXM, and I was no objective person or anything. I was there to basically make fun of it and be terrified of it. And the night before, the Obamas were still, I assumed, sleeping in the White House. So I drank 3 beers, ate some kind of a meat. I was drunk, and then I went running in tights. I run in tights. I don't care what you or anybody thinks. And I ran up to the White House, and I screamed, "Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. President. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Obama." And I was screaming it, and a guy, a police officer, walked out to me and said, "Sir, that's the Treasury Department." So I didn't know my way around, but I did spend a good amount of time there, and I did love running. But that's my but you've been working on voting issues, let's call it. If we're going to be general, we can be specific, you can, for a really long time. And I'm guessing you never thought it was going to get this bad, starting maybe with Shelby versus Holder. I'm not sure when you got on board, really, but the Supreme Court decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act, much less all of these other decisions that have allowed, the second decision from the Supreme Court on voting rights, that have allowed all these states to bring us back to before Dr. Martin Luther King and LBJ worked together. How do you see it? How long have you been working on it? And take us through kind of the journey of what really happened to voting rights in your time.
Laziness on the side of the Democrats is what happened. When I was in law school, 2007 to 2010. So it was before Holder or Shelby County v. Holder. And I studied voting rights with this really incredible voting rights professor at Michigan Law, where I went. And I was doing this independent study, and I went to South Africa, and I was working for the South African government there, but I was also doing a study looking at voting in South Africa and sort of what had happened after apartheid, et cetera, and sort of where they were going. And it was interesting because if you spent any time in South Africa before Mandela passed away, then everything that has happened since was very predictable. Everybody in South Africa knew exactly what was happening. And everyone outside of it was like, no, everything's wonderful there. And it was not. But we still had a Voting Rights Act. And so I graduated and I was like, shh, we're fine. And I went to the DNC. I just watched a very dark documentary about North Korea. So I've been thinking about the DNC. But I went there to interview for a job in the voting rights department, and it was just 2 Obama donors. And actually, we got into this is why I did not get the job, because we got into a real fight about South Africa because they were like, everything's great there, and I was like, I was just there, and let me explain to you why it's not. I was right. But also it was like, oh, they're not doing anything. And so I went off, and I had also been in the education world. And so I went off and worked in ed reform, which is another space that no one should ever be in. 2013, Shelby County v. Holder happened. So for anyone listening, that was, first of all, if you didn't go to law school or weren't a real nerd, that's probably the first time you ever really heard about Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Right, maybe.
Because that was the Supreme Court decision where the court basically, they struck down a big part of the Voting Rights Act that essentially had required a large set of states, including states you wouldn't expect, like parts of California, to seek judicial review. Basically, anytime they wanted to change some sort of voting law, they had to go to the DOJ and say, hey, we want to do this thing. And then the DOJ would look at it and either say, yeah, great, or that is wildly racist, go away. And so Shelby County v. Holder was Shelby County, Alabama, going to the Supreme Court and saying, we don't need this anymore. Black people are voting, Black president, racism is clearly over. And the court said, you know what, you're right.
I mean, Justice Roberts, in his opinion, basically said that.
I mean, literally in his opinion, he said, Black people are voting, so clearly we don't need protections that allow Black people to continue voting. And also, Obama, racism's over. We did it in America. Great job. Well, pat on the back. This is awesome.
I think the whites ended a lot of sentences we did with, and also Obama for a while, to just make the point that everything is now equal
on both sides of the party, or on both sides of the aisle. And then that is the dissent, where RBG said, the very famous quote: if it's raining outside and you have an umbrella so you can't feel the rain, you don't say, oh, it's not raining, let me put away this umbrella. Right. And so exactly what she said would happen happened. Literally within 2 hours, Alabama and Texas started passing voter ID laws, because this is something that the Republican Party, they're so incredible at long-term strategy. They're so incredible at really coming up. And look, it's McConnell you may hate him, but the man's an evil genius. And this is how we ended up with the judiciary that we have. Is literally just 50 years of very hard strategic work on the side of the Republicans. And what they did with voting is that they had started decades before testing out voter ID laws and seeing how they would work and this and that. And then Republicans got kind of lucky when it came to voter suppression, because when 9/11 happened, all of a sudden, we started making it almost impossible to get IDs, which is where my work comes in.
Right.
So that by the time Shelby County v. Holder passed, we had like 4-ish states that had voter ID laws. Some had them, some sort of kind of didn't. They were constantly sort of being argued in the court. And then all of a sudden we went from, 4-ish or so in 2013 to 21 by the 2016 election. And we're at 36 now. And so it allowed,
luckily, the populations of those states don't add up as much to the populations in many of the other states, right? That have better laws and a lot more people living in them, a lot more voters living in them. Is that a silver lining, or is that right, or am I not even understanding?
I feel like that it doesn't make a huge difference, right? Because it only really matters when you think about the Electoral College, right? And there's a reason.
Yeah. Because of that, that's why it matters so much. But at just a point anyway, yes, go ahead. I'm interrupting with a somewhat boring point about it.
It's because, you also have to look at local elections and state elections, right? And if you look at the fact that the vast majority of states are either, double or triple R, right? So they either they're both chambers of their state legislature, right, and their governor Republican, or 2 out of the 3.
Got it.
And when you look at everything from the things that really matter, 80% of the decisions that impact your life are decided by state and local government. And so when you're looking at mayor, at sheriff, at district attorney, at state courts, at state legislators, et cetera, it matters. If there are over 26 million American adults who don't have access to photo ID. Those people are almost exclusively on the very lowest end of the socioeconomic ladder, right? So when you have over 11% of American adults who can't vote, and they are all people who are the most vulnerable and marginalized, then what you have is people being elected to state and local offices who are not representing the people who need representation the most.
Talk to me about specifically how you've been on the ground working for a long time on this. So before we actually get to those who don't have access to IDs and help us understand who those people are and how they're in that situation and the good work that you're doing to help them literally get IDs, talk to me about some of the laws that were passed during the time you've been working on this issue that have just obviously been passed to make it harder to vote, and if they have, in fact, made it harder to vote, and what you've had to do to adapt to them. Because it seems like a lot of your work is unfortunately reactive to these laws that get made. These laws that get made it make it harder to vote, and you have to react to that. Am I right about that, or at least some of your work?
Somewhat. A lot of voting rights work is because of what we do and how we do it. It's a little less so. But, Shelby County v. Holder was really the biggest blow, but by no means the last blow to the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act now is sort of hanging on by a thin thread. There are a couple of things in it that still stand. But for the most part, what SCOTUS has done over the last it's only been 10 years or a little more, is that they've really just decimated a lot of the Voting Rights Act. So one of the biggest things that happened in 2020 was that they Alabama, who are fantastic litigators, I guess, they wanted to both require ID. Again, there's a lot of ID things because it's just a very efficient way to eliminate a lot of people from voting. They wanted to require ID for absentee voting, which was a thing that had not really been the case for very long, but you can imagine why in 2020 that would be important. And also have sort of these onerous requirements, right? So you couldn't just write an ID number, but you had to have a copy of it and mail it and all these different things. And the Supreme Court was yeah, sounds great. Basically, we're at a point where anytime any state takes anything to the Supreme Court that will restrict voting more, the Supreme Court will say yes. We've got, there's been so many, I'm trying to narrow it down, but there's one sort of big case next year coming up that will sort of, it won't be the final blow, but it really sort of kill the VRA, because we're at a point now where last year the Supreme Court said that they didn't say you can gerrymander according to race, but they didn't say that you can't. They did one of these things like they did with Bush v. Gore, where they were like, we're making a decision on this. It doesn't really count for any other decision. But then again, we're setting precedent. And also, we're going to put together this test that's very vague. So basically, every court's going to be afraid to say anything other than this decision we've made here because we've made it possibly vague. And that's what they're doing. So essentially right now, voting is very challenging. And what it's meant for voting rights orgs is, constantly adapting. You're constantly, adapting all of the educational material you have out. We have a website called readtheeffingdirections.com, which gives all of the directions for how to vote absentee in every state. We are constantly having to adapt that as that changes and as it gets more and more restrictive, and we're adding more and more instructions because it's getting harder and harder to do this in any state. And so, you're constantly having to look at, well, what's the law, both with SCOTUS, but then in all 50 states, how are they adapting to this and how are they changing, and then having to change what you're telling people.
Well, luckily you're a lawyer, so you have to almost have a lot of lawyers on your team to be able to navigate these. But without getting too in the weeds on the laws, I mean, it would seem that, as you said, they make it harder to vote by making it harder to get an ID or targeting people who have a more difficult time getting an ID. You've been hearing these arguments for years, but I got to throw them out there just to hear how the expert in this case handles them. I've got my points that I always make, but when people say to you, anybody can get an ID, what do you say? First of all, let's start there. Anybody, it's not hard to get an ID. And then you're out there living with folks, working with folks, and you have a litany of reasons why it is. Tell us the truth about what the reality is.
Yeah, well, look, to those people, I always say, close your eyes and remember the last time you went to the DMV, right? It was probably miserable for you, and you're probably one of the many people of the population who has, say, a home, right? And so when
you mean an address at least,
right? Like a place to live, right? Yeah. Unlike millions of Americans, it feels like it's easy to get an ID because we're all coming from this place of just really wild privilege, right? Where the DMV can require stacks of documents and a good amount of money. I mean, $35, $40 often to get an ID, and having to take time off of work because you have to go during business hours and stand in line for hours and this and that. And that is something that most of us, although it's burdensome, and although all of us have probably let our licenses expire or not gotten an ID in a new state for a really long time because of how burdensome it was, that we're able to do. But when you think about the large percentage of people, and again, over 26 million American adults don't have government issued photo ID because you need a birth certificate. Well, 6 to 8 million American adults don't have access to their birth documents. It's about 57% of our clients cannot get birth certificates. And here's why. This is honestly, so much of our work is this problem. If you go to Vital Records and ask for a birth certificate, they will ask for your ID. If you do not have an ID, getting a birth certificate is really hard. And in some states, they'll say, well, get this notarized, which you also either need an ID for, or depending on the state, you have to take 2 people with an ID with you to the notary who will then verify your identity, right? It's very complicated. Or, we've had people who, as lawyers, we've had to say, here's my bar number, and I am verifying that this person is who they say they are, right? Or you have to have miles of documents, or all of these different things. Every state has different rules. New York is the hardest state to get any documents, an ID, a birth certificate. And our general counsel now is best friends with their general counsel because we're on the phone with them so often because we have so many unhoused people who don't have ID. So getting a birth certificate to get an ID is wildly difficult.
Is there, it is a legitimate problem, right? I mean, to prove that you are who you say that you are before we get to the ID and the voting and all the rights that come with it. How would you even, how do you navigate it if I've also got any number of reasons why I lost or don't have my birth certificate? There's no one way, I'd imagine.
There's no one way. We have a large document. And at this point, we're, probably the experts at getting birth certificates from all 50 states plus, Puerto Rico. That's tough. But there's different rules, not just for every state, but for different counties within every state. And so you just have to become an expert and work with and know, like, all right, in Pennsylvania, we do this, in Hawaii, we do this, in, Pender County, we do this, etc. So you have to get birth documents, which are challenging. Then you have to show proof of residency, which again, if you are unhoused, if you are even, someone who is living in a home where your name isn't on any of the bills, right? Like there are a million reasons why you may not have proof of residency. Also, those birth certificates, they cost, if you're lucky, maybe $15. But when we have to go through a very complicated online process to get them, they can cost $50 to $90 to get a birth certificate. So you've got to have proof of residency. You have to have proof of Social Security in all but maybe 2 states. You need a Social Security card to get an ID, which again, if you don't have an ID, getting a Social Security card is really hard. And so then you have to do that, right? If you've ever changed your name, you've been married, divorced, widowed, adopted, whatever, you have to have the proof of every time you've changed your name. And all of those things require going to different county offices or this or that and paying for it. And so you end up with this huge stack of documents that were expensive and that are bureaucratically really challenging to get. I mean, I've helped folks get IDs and birth certificates who haven't had them in decades. Our organization has 20, 30, 40 years because they couldn't make it through these hoops. And because other organizations don't know how to do it because it's not their expertise and it really needs to be your expertise. And so our organization has helped people who haven't had IDs for 10, 20, 30, 40 years once because they couldn't get around these barriers. And so you have all that. Then you have the transportation. If you don't have an ID, you don't have a car, right? More than 10 million Americans live more than 10 miles from a DMV. Getting there is tough. And then you have to pay for the ID, and it all adds up. And so if you are unhoused, if you're a recently returned citizen, if you're a former foster youth, the barriers. So there is a thing that you're allowed to do in this country that I think should be illegal. You can unadopt a child.
What?
And we have this happen all the time. I actually have a couple clients right now who they have foster parents, they've been adopted, and then they unadopt them. We have kids who they turn 18 and their foster parents kick them out, drop them in the curve, no documents, no anything. It happens all the time. And so you have kids who, I have one who had their name and then they were adopted, they took a new name, and then they were unadopted, and then they were adopted again and took a new name, and then they were unadopted again. And so we have to find all of those documents. And of course, these kids, they've been through a million different houses. They have, they were very young when this happened, being able to remember how, what county and what courthouse and what date was your name changed when you were 9 years old and your foster parents unadopted you, like that.
Jeez.
Possible. And so there's all of these barriers that people don't recognize. We have, so one common tactic of domestic abusers is that they hold on to the documents of people they're abusing. So we get a lot of survivors who have escaped, but they don't have any documents because they just escaped with their lives and, their children often. And so now they have to start all over again, proving who they are. There's so many different circumstances, and the DMV has so many rules, and I won't even get into Real ID, that when you actually live this every day, you realize like, oh, it's actually, for me, it's a miracle that only 26 million American adults don't have ID. It's incredible to me that somehow 90% of people in this country manage to get an ID because it's so hard.
The question when it comes to, there's so many things I want to say to respond, but getting to the issue of voting and a lot of what your work is, the argument is made, obviously been being made for several years now, that, you should have to have an ID to vote because we wouldn't want people coming and fraudulently voting. That would be bad. And number two, it's the least thing you should be able to do to prove that you are who you say you are, so you don't come and vote over and over. So we don't have any number of issues that we could have as a result of you not having an ID. And then we scream back at them, but we don't have those issues.
Right.
And it doesn't make any sense to commit that crime. Like the reason why we don't need those IDs is because people don't vote fraudulently, because why would you?
Right.
Why would you do that?
It's every reputable study on earth has shown that this isn't a thing that happens. And we know we have, tons of recordings and interviews and whatever from people who help pass these laws, who say they know that that's not why they're doing it. It's not about voter fraud. It's about keeping particular people from voting. What we say though is, look, first of all, this isn't a thing that's happening. But second, so we have a political arm, Project ID Action Fund. And last year, we introduced a bill to Congress, the IDs for an Inclusive Democracy Act, which would establish a free federal ID. Because my thing is, you want voter ID lists? Fine. Make sure everyone has an ID. Because here's the thing. You need them for jobs and for housing and for medical care and for access to social services and so many other things. And we are the only country in the world that doesn't just give people an ID. So if you want people to have an ID to vote, then pass our law. We'll make sure every person in this country has an ID, and then fine, they can take it to the polls.
But the obstacle of that is the same reason why they pass it in the first place. They'll just make a bullshit argument as to why they're not going to make it easier to get an ID. Because what you're doing is you're saying, all right, if you want to make it harder to vote, need an ID? Fine, make it easier then to get an ID. And they're just going to say, nah, we're good. We'll keep it the way it is, right? I mean,
so here's the thing, because when you look at the ID issue, voting is such a very, very small piece of it. We actually get a lot of bipartisan support on ID bills. And you can see this, in other states and in our attempt to now get this bill through Congress, because really it's about jobs. It's about healthcare. It's about recidivism, right? It's about so many other things. You cannot end homelessness without making sure everyone has an ID, because you need an ID to get housing. You need an ID to take that Section 8 housing. You need an ID to get into many shelters and get food from those food banks, right? And so when you frame it outside of voting and say, hey, this ID is actually about people not dying in the streets. And if you look at the veterans, the number of veterans we work with who can't get ID, which is infuriating. And we're working on some state legislation around that as well. If you look at the foster youth, right? If you look at the fact that, people on both sides of the aisle are very concerned about recidivism. But when someone gets out of prison, we say, go get a job. Right. Don't hang out with those people who got you in trouble, which is probably your friends and family, and we're not going to help give you an ID or anything to be able to do that. And so then what happens? There's a prison to homelessness pipeline, because we've also criminalized homelessness, right? And so when you talk to people about IDs, about all of the other issues, and then voting is such a small piece of it, that people really realize, like, oh, this is actually, it's such a common sense thing. The $40 it would cost to get an ID is so much less. Well,
I think what I'm hearing you saying, I didn't think of it, is that there could be bipartisan support for it, because they want voter ID laws to make it harder for likely Democratic voters to vote, black and brown folks, minorities. Oh, I'm not supposed to say minorities anymore, but the people that they don't want to vote, that they typically vote for Democrats. So they make it harder. But at the same side, those same people also are being lobbied by industries and special interests that want those same people to work for them at maybe their low wage jobs or whatever jobs, and they can't hire them without an ID. So while you're making it harder to vote, I hear you, you're also making it harder for me to hire that dude who would otherwise, I'd love to have come help me make a fortune or whatever. Am I getting that right?
I mean, you're even making it, pharmaceutical companies are an industry that we're really looking at to help support the bill, because if you do not have insurance and you want to get into any sort of program that will help subsidize your medications, you need an ID. And so we have, free and charitable clinics. We have the National Association for Free and Charitable Clinics that has endorsed our bill, because there are millions of Americans who need medication and they can't get it.
So let me just do that one in 10 seconds. We, the pharmaceutical industry, need people to buy our drugs, and they can't buy our drugs without ID. So stop this nonsense and give them an ID.
Exactly. But if Pfizer wants it, it can't be bad.
I mean, listen, it's too easy to demonize any one entity. The truth is, there could be whatever. If your interests are my interests, and it's going to make it easier to vote. And also, I'm going to get, a job, maybe not a great job, maybe a great job. I think you're insinuating there's a lot of great jobs that you obviously still have to have an ID, and it's tough to get. And then fine, there's common interest there. So tell me, you're doing so many different things with your life, with these initiatives. I'll plug all of them in the show notes and so on. But you've also got a book deal, and you've written a book for Harper Collins. This is a huge deal. I just wanted to ask you about that. You're just a fascinating person with your life, your work, and now this book, American Identity Crisis. I can't wait to read it. But what's it about?
Well, it's about all of this. I'm definitely, it comes out September 19th. So September 20th, I'm hoping to see it on this bookshelf behind you. It's the story of this identity crisis that we're having in America. It's about how did we end up with over 26 million American adults not having ID? What does it really look like? And, what are like stories from people we've worked with? How did our organization build up to be able to handle this? And then how do we solve the problem?
Love it. That sounds awesome. I mean, it sounds real. It's kind of encompassing all your work. You, part of what you do to help people get IDs is you meet them where they're at. And in this case, you spend a lot of time with the unhoused. Why are they unhoused? What do people need to know about this issue in California, or probably similarly? I mean, I think it matters that there are different root causes, but there are a lot of similar root causes. Knowing what you know and spending so much time with folks trying to help them, how would you identify root causes?
I mean, number one is the cost of housing. Right. I think we've all hopefully seen the articles and the studies that show that in every single city in America, you cannot afford a 1-bedroom apartment working 40 hours a week at a minimum wage job. Right. Like the cost of housing is shocking. The reason that we have such a huge homelessness crisis in LA is partially because LA County is massive, right? It's 88 cities. It's the 6th largest economy in the world. There's just billions of people here, but also housing is wildly expensive. A 1-bedroom apartment is like $2,500 a month if you're lucky. And so the cost of housing is the number one reason. We work with so many people who come here or live here and they have jobs, but the jobs just don't cover housing. We help people get IDs. And I have this guy, we helped him get an ID. He immediately got a job at Home Depot. You know what you're never going to be able to afford with a job at Home Depot? An apartment in Los Angeles.
Right.
Like there's just no way. And so,
but you might be able to get a discount on supplies to build a very small, tiny shed like mine.
Right. You build a tiny shed and then, put it somewhere in the Angeles National Forest and hope no one ever sees you. Yeah. And so the cost of housing is absolutely number one. It's just, it's impossible. And it's the reason that we're seeing homelessness everywhere. There are other issues, we have a huge problem, and partially this is related to the cost of housing. In LA, if you're lucky enough to get a Section 8 voucher, which we know all over the country, you could be on the list for decades, but it's really hard to get apartments that will accept it because housing is so expensive and so many people desperately need it that it's a losing proposition. And so we need to build more. I always tell people, like, look at our cities and then go look at Tokyo or Shanghai, right? Or like really big modern cities. And the difference is stunning. I remember going to Tokyo for the first time and realizing like, oh my God, wait, this is what we should look like. There's miles of very tall apartment buildings. Like there's enough housing for everyone. That's not what any American city looks like.
Yeah, but come on, they have flying cars there. They're in the future.
Got robots, they've got Harajuku girls. I mean, look, Tokyo is the greatest place on earth, but we're not building enough and we're not building tall enough. And a lot of that is due to, and I won't get into the weeds of city councils and the measures they have put in place to keep housing down because they don't want to urbanize too much because brown people wouldn't win, but that's what it is.
I hate that Steph Curry has gotten implicated. You see the news like today, he doesn't want.
Oh, I can't believe Steph Curry is a NIMBY. See, anytime you get rich, you go to the dark side. Can I defend it for 1 second? If you're like one of the most famous people in the world or something, like it's hard to get privacy. It's a tough trade-off, but forget him because we don't even need to debate that or the ridiculousness of it. NIMBY is a real thing, and the policies, talking about the policy, all of us who advocate, vocally or support these candidates of those, but then when the solution is going to be in our neighborhood, slow it on down, limousine liberals, whatever you want to call folks. But what do you think about specifically? I would imagine you have an opinion about Los Angeles and the new mayor there. Karen Bass was a really interesting, I guess, very expensive, maybe the most ever mayoral campaign. Is she going to be any different? Will she be able to get more solutions passed? We're hoping. So it was the most expensive mayoral campaign because Rick Caruso spent literally 90% of the money.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
About $1 million to every one of her $1 million. I think it was literally like $120 million to $8 million. And it was all his own personal money. So great job, Rick. Could have gone to space. I have a lot of hope that Mayor Bass will be different. She came in and right away declared a state of emergency.
Yeah, I saw that, but I was like, yeah.
I think we're still trying to figure out what that actually means and what that will actually look like. But I think that the good thing about having Mayor Basson is that she started as a community organizer. She's from LA. She understands the problem. I think the thing that people don't realize about Los Angeles is that LA is a city in a large county. Again, it's 88 cities, right? And so we have a mayor who does not control the city council. Our city council is an independent entity. They are the highest paid city council in the country. They make more than members of Congress, and there's only 13 of them. They are very powerful. But even more powerful than them are the 5 county boards of supervisors who run the 6th largest economy in the world. And they are 5 boards of supervisors. They're all women. It's awesome. We've had an all-female board of supervisors for a few years now. They're wildly powerful, and they actually are the people who make the biggest decisions about what happens in Los Angeles County. And so there is only so much that Mayor Bass can do. There is only so much that the LA City Council could do. They could do a lot more than they're doing, but there's only so much. But really who we have to be looking at is our board of supervisors.
Which one is the group that had the controversial commentary, racist shit?
That was the Los Angeles City Council. And one of those racists is still on, and he won't resign. And no one has the power to fire him because that's how independent they are. Oh,
the audacity. Whew. Okay. So spreadthevote.org, projectid.org, any other call to actions, call to arms. And, when can we talk? I definitely will. Hopefully I'll talk to you again between now and September. But when the book comes out, I'd love to read it and interview you about that. But anything else that you want to say or mention here at the end?
I mean, look, speaking of the book, you can pre-order it. You can go to katcalvin.com/pre-order and take a look at that. And I would also say, you can go to our website, id4id.org. It's all about the bill that we have in Congress right now, the IDs for an Inclusive Democracy Act. Check it out. Sign up for our newsletter. We want to pass this bill. Even now in this Congress, I think we can make a lot of steps forward. And that is going to be the thing that solves this problem. It will be one of the most significant acts of legislation that this country has passed in a long time. So please go to id4id.org and check it out.
Kat Calvin, thank you very much. Great to meet you. Congratulations on all of your really impressive work. And I can't wait to read your book and talk to you about that.
Thanks so much, Pete. It was great. Can't wait to talk to you again.
All right, there she goes. katcalvin.com, everybody. At katcalvinla. Please go let her know that you saw her, you heard her here on the show, and follow her. And that's the best thing, easy thing that you can do outside writing a review on Spotify and Apple, iTunes podcasts. Give us a 5-star review if you could, and sign up for a paid subscription, because this is what I'm doing for a living every day, this podcast. It is a lot of hours every day. Not complaining about it, just asking you that if you like it, please pay for it. It's less than a coffee a day. Isn't that what people like to say? Although coffee's getting more expensive. But you can pay $5 or more. Some people pay lots more, and I am super grateful to each and every one of you. Thank you very much. I hope to see you at the Hangouts on Thursday nights. You should be getting an email if you're a paid subscriber. In that email, there should be a photo of nature submitted by another subscriber listener like you. So send your vitamin N. I got a great one up there today from Therese Taffy, my friend here just north of me in New York State. And though there's a road in it, which is a man-made object, which isn't allowed, but it's such a good shot that I allowed for it in this case to make the rare exception. But I need more. Send me your vitamin N pictures. If you're still listening to my voice, go outside in nature. If you got man-made objects everywhere, just take a picture of the top of a tree, the clouds, whatever. Send them my way. I always love to see them. Stand up with Pete at gmail.com, and maybe I'll share it with everybody else. Hopefully I will. All right, send those, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. That's all I've got for you. Thanks again to Michael Cohen. Didn't mention that. And to everybody listening, that's it. Have a great day with whatever you've been doing while listening or are doing after listening. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
One thing to do before we stand our ground, and then stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all they had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up.